Pleased to welcome on the Newsline a return guest to the program. He's Thomas Aiello. Mr. Aiello is Senior Director of Government Affairs for the National Taxpayers Union. They are online, ntu.org. Tommy Aiello, good morning, and thanks for taking the time.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
For those who've not heard our prior conversations, please remind us, National Taxpayers Union, who are you folks and what do you do?
We're a D.C.-based organization that protects and promotes taxpayer interests. We're up on Capitol Hill every day fighting for lower taxes, limited government, and free markets. And then we also have a pretty effective state government affairs apparatus as well. So we're in all 50 states and here in D.C.
And again, it's ntu.org. All manner of really good information there. And if you go there right now, you'll see a link to a piece that apparently appeared yesterday in the Washington Times, authored by Mr. Aiello, on the topic of credit card price controls. Now, we heard the president make the statement that he wants to cap credit card interest rates at 10% for at least a limited period of time. I suppose in theory that sounds okay, but it really has some long-reaching implications that are not necessarily good for a lot of folks.
Well, I think this conversation stems from the president's desire to lower prices across the board, keep more money in people's pockets, and I think he's trying to get creative with some of these different solutions. Now, I think where the problem you run into is, what is the federal government's role in this, and will those actions make things worse? And I think when we look at this conversation, anytime the federal government is putting a price control on a product, whether it's consumer credit card rates, mandating gasoline prices at a certain level, rent control, or interchange fees on credit and debit cards, the result is always the same. One, there's shortages, consumers are worse off, and at the end of the day, the federal government will make the problem worse and not fix it. So I think the president is right to address the affordability crisis, but he needs to double down on his proven solutions of getting government out of the way and cutting taxes in order to achieve what he wants to achieve, not more federal involvement in consumer credit markets.
The theory that some are promoting is that, well, this will be great for those who do not have stellar credit because there will be lower interest rates. In other words, if you have to carry a balance on your credit card, it's because you don't have the money to pay for it. And if the interest is accruing at a lower rate, that's a good thing. That is, unless all of a sudden you no longer have access to a credit card, correct? I mean, that's the whole point of the system, is that these high interest rates that they put on credit cards, that goes to people who have demonstrated they don't have great credit or great means.
And that's really what I'm most concerned about in this whole conversation, is if you do put a price control on it, what happens? And I think there's been study after study that has said if you impose this price control or debit credit card processing mandates, as the Senate is proposing to do, what you're going to see is a big freeze across the consumer credit market. You're going to see credit dry up for those lower income consumers that actually really need the access to a credit card. And what's going to happen in addition to that, the potentially as high as 80% of lower-income Americans are going to lose access to their credit card. If they don't lose access to credit, one, you're going to see a larger annual fee if you have one on your credit card, and if not, you're probably going to see a very large one imposed on it. And three, these credit card loyalty points for your miles and your cash back and all those other benefits that Americans really like, it's very possible those are going to go away or be significantly scaled back. So when you take all of these things together, you're going to have a really worse off situation. And we want more people to have credit. I think it's 80% of Americans have a credit card and they really like their credit card. Now, the problem is, people that carry a balance, and let's remember the overwhelming majority of people don't end up carrying a monthly balance. Most Americans pay off their credit card every single month. But it's that minority of people that we want to look out for. And I don't think we look out for them by taking away their federal government taking away their credit card without their permission. I think at the end of the day, it's putting more money in people's pockets so they can manage their debt in a more effective way.
And this is something that I think is very important, and you just noted. A lot of us use our credit cards for everything. In other words, I don't carry cash. It's not because of anything other than I just don't carry cash. It's not like I'm in favor of a digital currency or anything. It's just I find it more convenient to put all my purchases on a credit card that gives me a cashback bonus. And at the end of the month, we pay the credit card off in full. So I don't carry balances. And so when you hear about this limit on interest, many of us may say, well, who cares? I pay it off every month. Well, the who cares part is I'll no longer get that cashback bonus because that's being subsidized by folks who are paying interest on balances every month, correct?
I think to an extent that's true, but we need to remember why do credit card and banks, why do they charge these interest rates in the first place? And obviously there's a profit motive. They're a private sector business. Sure. Businesses run on that profit motive.
Sure.
But there's also a higher default rate for people that use the credit card than the national average. There's overhead that is associated with the credit cards for running them on their networks, the investments into security to make sure there's no fraud. There's the staffing to ensure that these cards are processed properly, and then these loyalty points. All of these things together is how you probably end up with a 20 to 30% credit card interest rate if you actually carry the balance. Now, at the same time, we need to remember that just because you have a 20 to 30% interest on your credit card, that doesn't mean you're paying a 30% interest rate every single month. That's a 20% APR. That's the price over the course of a year. So whatever that rate is divided by 12, that's what people are paying every single month on their credit card. So even if you have a 20% or 24% interest rate, you're paying 2% every single month. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's still a lot, but it's not as high as what people think when you hear about an APR. Now, what the president wants to do with this 10% rate is that's still about a 1% rate every single month. So it's still pretty high. So I don't think, the federal government should be involved in these decision-making processes. It should be between new businesses coming in and offering credit at a more competitive rate than perhaps what, some other banks or other issuers are providing. I think that's how we end up lowering these prices across the board, not with, more federal mandates.
Thomas Aiello is Senior Director of Government Affairs with the National Taxpayers Union. NTU.org is the website. He joins us live on News Talk 1540 KXEL. Right there on that main page of NTU.org is a link to the piece that he authored, which appeared yesterday in the Washington Times, WashingtonTimes.com. And it is a difficult balance, obviously, as you already noted. What's the role of the government with regard to, shall we say, interfering in a free market? And I understand the idea of trying to kickstart things, juice it a little bit, etc. But is the president specifically endorsing the Durbin-Marshall plan that's been introduced, or is he simply signing off, near as you can tell, on the concept of limitation on interest rates?
Well, he's done both. Obviously, he had his Truth Social come out last week saying, yes, 10% price control on consumer credit interest rates. And then he had a subsequent Truth Social endorsing this credit card Marshall Plan, which would mandate certain processing of credit cards, which is a really bad idea. And, there's a history, actually, to this bill. You just have to go back to 2010 when President Obama signed this massive Wall Street reform bill that imposed a similar price control on debit card interchange fees. And the result of that was, as many predicted, no more free checking. There were debit card rewards. All of those things went away. So there's a history here of the federal government getting involved and consumers being worse off because of these laws. And that's what I'm so concerned about this time around is, I don't want to see a repeat of that happening. There's 80% of Americans, adult Americans, own a credit card. There's going to be a lot of unhappy people if you start to take away some of their benefits associated with their card. But that doesn't mean we can't protect people that have these debts. We absolutely should, and we should do more to help them get out of debt. But at the same time, I don't think price controls are the right answer to achieve that end.
And something else that you've noted, but I think it bears repeating, the businesses, if I'm using my credit card at any business, or if you're using your credit card at my small business, I have to pay a transaction fee. And more businesses are adding that. I notice it particularly in restaurants where they say if you are paying cash, that's the menu price. Or if you are paying by credit card, there's a 3% surcharge because they don't want to have to, their margins are tight enough they can't afford to absorb the credit card processing rate. That's, again, this is just kind of a tight wire balance, if you will. And putting too many different components into the system is going to make it unworkable to where there are going to be folks who say cash only.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's true. And we see this here all the time where I am. We call it feeflation. Everywhere you look, there's a fee at the end of your bill. And it's very frustrating for consumers and obviously for small businesses too. And, there was a big settlement at the end of last year between, these credit card processors and small businesses. And I think that's giving people hope that, one, the free market works when you let it work. These are businesses that came together to figure out, a solution to the problem that you just highlighted. And I think that's the best approach, not, with the federal government coming in. But, it's a little bit different than the conversation we've been having. But I think it's an important one because we all want small businesses to be protected. And we want to make sure that consumers aren't needlessly hurt by some of these fees that are being imposed on them.
And this is the thing. There are a lot of different components, but they are interrelated because if, for example, I'm somebody who is charging a meal on a credit card, all of a sudden my price just went up 3% if somebody is imposing that as the vendor, and that just makes the debt situation even more complicated. Right. And we are at a point, and this, I think, circles back to your overall thesis, that something needs to be done, but this isn't the method. Something has to be done to help people, but this isn't the method. Namely, Americans are carrying a record amount of credit card debt, and that's with this high interest. So therefore, relatively high interest. So the issue is not necessarily the credit card interest rate. It's how do we get people to not go into debt to begin with, to have more money in their pocket overall?
Yeah, and that's one of the solutions to this is, how do people afford to live within their means? And part of that is very tough with this very high inflation. And I think part of that is, people are going to start to file their taxes on Monday. And because of what President Trump and Republicans in Congress did, the average American is going to receive a $3,000 tax cut compared to if they did nothing last year. That's great news for people. And I think it's, how do people use that money? Do they use it effectively? Do they go on vacation? Do they pay down their debt? Do they save it? And I think that's part of the conversation about this, this free will. And how do Americans respond to, more money in their pockets? Hopefully, if they have high debt, they'll address it that way. But again, that's for people and their own decisions to be made.
Tommy Aiello is Senior Director of Government Affairs with the National Taxpayers Union, online, ntu.org, and that's where you can go to read the piece that he authored in the Washington Times or get much more information on this topic. The headline of that piece, by the way, is Credit Card Price Controls Won't Make America More Affordable. Always informative, sir. Thanks for the time. We'll talk again soon.
Yes, thanks for having me.
And Mr. Aiello joined us live on the Newsline on News Talk 1540 KXEL, where Iowa comes to talk.